Naughty Dog has incorporated multiplayer into many of its games, but the studio's never released a primarily multiplayer-focused title. However, that is about to change, according to recent job listings from the Santa Monica-based developer. Naughty Dog is looking for a new gameplay scripter and level designer to join its team on a multiplayer-focused project. The posting fueled speculation that the promised factions mode for The Last of Us 2 might be getting spun off into a separate game. The ad invites potential applicants to embark on Naughty Dog's newest adventure, the studio's first standalone multiplayer game. It goes on to explain the studio's desire to create a multiplayer experience that shows the same quality and ambition as its story-driven offerings. While there's no concrete evidence pointing that direction, it's possible the studio is working on a multiplayer spin-off of its popular The Last of Us series. The original The Last of Us featured several team-based multiplayer modes. Players took the role as a member of either the Fireflies or a group of hostile survivors called the Hunters. While the single-player story was The Last of Us' primary focus, the factions modes were nonetheless quite popular. Naughty Dog initially intended for there to also be a multiplayer component in The Last of Us 2. The studio axed those plans in favor of focusing on the game's single-player content. Naughty Dog previously indicated a desire to reintroduce factions in some capacity. Expanding it into a full game creates opportunities for a multiplayer experience that's much greater in scope. It also makes sense given comments from PlayStation Studios boss Herman Hulst. During a Q&A earlier this month, he talked about how narrative-driven single-player games have been, and will continue to be a significant focus for PlayStation Studios. However, he also indicated an interest in offering more varied experiences, saying, "Who says that multiplayer experience cannot have great stories, right?" So, while still far from confirmed, a multiplayer-focused The Last of Us game seems increasingly likely. Whether it will be a spin-off or a direct sequel is still an open question. An early outline for The Last of Us 3 already exists, but is not in development, according to Naughty Dog co-president Neil Druckmann. There are also substantial hurdles to creating a story-driven multiplayer experience, assuming that's what the studio has in mind. Just look at the original Titanfall to see how narrative storytelling and competitive multiplayer can be hard to mix. Of course, there's no guarantee that the upcoming game will even be part of the Last of Us franchise. Naughty Dog could just as easily transplant factions-inspired gameplay into a new setting. There is no official confirmation the new game has any connection to The Last of Us at all. Still, fans of The Last of Us multiplayer have good reasons to be hopeful. Naughty Dog is also working on a new sci-fi IP, which is exciting, and I am definitely looking forward to the multiplayer. We know their quality, and I know we will not be disappointed. The third installment in Insomniac Games' Resistance series of first-person shooters came out nearly 10 years ago and, although it may have been forgotten by some gamers, others are still hoping for a continuation of the story about aliens invading Earth. And it seems that even Insomniac Games at one point had plans to keep the series going. A couple of months after the release of Resistance 3 in 2011, CEO Ted Price announced that Insomniac Games had no definitive plans to work on additional titles in the franchise. The reason for this decision was not entirely clear because, while the third game didn't break any sales records, it sold fairly well and received primarily positive reviews. It seems that the studio eventually changed course on that decision and Insomniac pitched Resistance 4 to Sony, but was ultimately turned down. During an episode of the PlayStation podcast Sacred Symbols, game developer Colin Moriarty revealed that friends from within Insomniac had shared this tidbit of information. Apparently, the proposal to make a fourth game in the Resistance series was rejected because Sony felt that there were too many post-apocalyptic games already in development. At the time, four other titles with similar post-apocalyptic vibes were concurrently in pre-development for the PS3, Killzone Shadow Fall, Horizon Zero Dawn, Days Gone, and The Last of Us. More specifically, Sony felt that the premise of Resistance 4 sounded too similar to that of Naughty Dog's The Last of Us and didn't want the two titles competing with each other or perhaps causing gamer fatigue. According to Moriarty, Resistance was shut down at that point. While this might be disheartening for us to hear, the news doesn't mean that Resistance has been put to rest forever. At this point, The Last of Us 2 has released to an overwhelmingly positive reception, and excitement is only growing for Guerrilla Games' Horizon Forbidden West as the game enters the final stages of development. Gamers' appetite for post-apocalyptic settings has not waned, and the prospect of Resistance 4 might sound more appealing to Sony now or in the future. At first glance, The Last of Us and the Resistance games might seem very dissimilar, with the first telling the story of a deadly fungus that transforms humans and animals into hostile mutants, and the second presenting an alternative history during an alien invasion of Earth. However, the aliens in Resistance grow their army by infecting humans with a virus that speeds up evolution and causes a range of mutations. And although the first game took place in the UK, Resistance 2 and 3 were set in a post-apocalyptic United States, much like The Last of Us. It may seem to ask more from Insomniac Games, but a Resistance reboot is definitely will be welcomed. We have discussed about the reboot of Sunset Overdrive and Resistance reboots in a previous video. Now let's look at the lead. The latest Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart trailer contains an insightful retrospective on the Ratchet & Clank series, from its origins on the PS2 up to the latest game in the series set to release on the PS5. One of the many charming details shown in its franchise evolution trailer is not only the featurette of the games themselves, but rather the decor of the room throughout the Ratchet & Clank timeline. Within each generation, various memorabilia related to Insomniac Games' previous works are shown relative to each timeline. The most recent timeline features the unexpected cameo of Fizzy from Sunset Overdrive that a fan eagerly pointed out in a tweet. The following reveals from Insomniac Games itself may potentially lead up to the return of one of Insomniac Games' cult classic titles in some capacity within Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. Among the many Ratchet figurines throughout the 2021 timeline, the Sunset Overdrive mascot and main villain, Fizzy, hidden behind a figurine box for the Ratchet & Clank Future series, was hidden in plain sight for many fans, initially. The Easter egg was first recognized by the general public via a fan who tweeted the discovery in his excitement. A few days later, following the retrospective trailer, the Sunset Overdrive Twitter account based on Fizzy had tweeted for the first time since 2018. Fizzy's tweet was actually a reference to a different tweet entirely, as earlier in the afternoon, the official Insomniac Games account tweeted a Sunset Overdrive-based tweet of its own. An image of the oversized Fizzy that the player fights in Sunset Overdrive is edited with a portal rift, making it appear as if the rift between the two universes is breaking apart. Insomniac Games acknowledging Sunset Overdrive is a huge win for its fans, as the game was exclusive on Microsoft consoles and PC for years prior to Sony purchasing the company. As Insomniac Games owns the Sunset Overdrive IP, this is the first time that the IP is shown on a Sony product following Sony registering the trademark in back March. Ultimately, it was a promotion for Ratchet & Clank's newest weapon, the RYN-08, first mentioned earlier in the afternoon as the latest edition of the superweapon first introduced in the original game. In Rift Apart, the RYN-08 has the ability to displace objects from other dimensions, featuring cameos from titles including Sly Cooper and Horizon Zero Dawn among others. With the bevy of Easter egg tweets coming full circle, the interconnectivity between Insomniac Games and its neighboring developers' various IPs forming a multiverse of sorts is an intriguing thought for the future of other titles within their individual franchises. As a part of the marketing for the aforementioned action-adventure shooter, the Sunset Overdrive IP was surprisingly brought back into the spotlight for a brief moment this week. It's now known that players who purchase Rift Apart will eventually get access to the Rhino 8 superweapon, which will pull in objects and characters from across the PlayStation universe. Curiously, the Sunset Overdrive universe will be one accessible source of power for the gun. The timing of such a tease seems suspicious for a number of reasons. Not only does this represent the biggest instance of Sony publicly acknowledging the Sunset Overdrive IP, there's still currently no way for fans to access the full game within the PlayStation ecosystem. This suggests that a remaster of the original game could be on the card soon, with the likes of the Summer Game Fest being just one avenue for the potential announcement. Despite holding a special place in the hearts of many players, there's a handful of shortcomings a remaster could fix. When it comes to gameplay mechanics, a lot of the effort Insomniac Games put into this area of Sunset Overdrive. While the arsenal of guns available in-game is just as worthy of Insomniac's renowned legacy, by modern standards there's one characteristic to using them that hasn't aged well. Even back in 2014, the act of physically pointing guns in Sunset Overdrive was described by critics and players as inconsistent, thanks to aggressive auto-aiming. At the time this trade-off made sense, with the constant momentum required to get the most out of the game's "the floor is lava"-inspired combat, having the effect of making shooting an almost secondary focus. With the DualSense being such a lauded revolution when it comes to controllers, there's a chance for these issues to be naturally ironed out in a remaster by the more immersive technology. Having already taken advantage of adaptive triggers and haptic feedback in Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, it's hard to imagine Insomniac won't add new wrinkles to combat that make the experience as enjoyable as other aspects of the game. It's impossible to talk about or play Sunset Overdrive without commenting on the game's brand of eccentric comedy. In many ways, Insomniac Games channeled all of its legacy into making the game the perfect metaphor for the studio itself. Throughout the experience, a hybrid of fourth wall breaks, sarcasm, and pop culture references dominated Sunset Overdrive almost as much as any gun or traversal mechanic. While this brand of humor delighted a lot of players, understandably others were turned off by the concoction. Being such a subjective aspect of the game means there's less obvious ways for a potential remaster to address this perceived tonal shortcoming. Other polarizing topics like a simplistic narrative and repetitive mission objectives would also more likely be things a ground-up remake would be better placed to address. However, there's still a chance Insomniac Games could tackle the comedy issue without tampering with Sunset Overdrive's unique identity. As it stands, the game makes a number of references to Microsoft and the Xbox ecosystem, all of which are easy to imagine Sony would want removed in any remaster. That leaves the door open for voiceover to be tweaked at the same time, which shouldn't be too much of a logistical nightmare as it might seem. Coincidentally, Sunset Overdrive's protagonist is voiced either by Yuri Lowenthal and Stephanie Lemelin, who just so happen to both play major roles in Insomnia Games' ongoing Marvel Spider-Man franchise. One of the biggest shortcomings of the original Sunset Overdrive is the simple fact that the game never received the sequel it arguably deserved because of its sales on the Xbox. While the game was beloved as something of a cult classic within the Xbox ecosystem, and one of the best console exclusives for the Xbox One, no follow-up was ever publicly confirmed to be on the table. As Insomniac Games gradually returned to Sony's orbit with the 2016 Ratchet and Clank and Marvel's Spider-Man series, the prospect of an improved follow-up started to feel like a pipe dream for many fans. With Insomniac Games now officially an integral member of PlayStation's first-party family, and all their IPs falling into Sony's control, the release of a remastered Sunset Overdrive opens the game up to a whole new audience. Fixing the shortcomings of that original game therefore not only represents an opportunity for an even better final product, it's also the best chance for the IP to flourish and become a franchise at the same time. Moving forward, we have a hot news from the Summer Game Fest, from Jeff Keighley and Hideo Kojima. When it comes to developers who blur the line between the real world, social commentary, and influence within their titles, Hideo Kojima has always been one who rarely shied away from such topics, especially with the Metal Gear series. The release of Death Stranding showed how Kojima envisioned the world through his creative eyes, yet the effects of the pandemic may have offered more insight on Death Stranding than initial thoughts would consider. Metal Gear and Death Stranding creator Hideo Kojima made a guest appearance at Summer Game Fest. The distinguished game developer talked candidly with Jeff Keighley about how he develops games, and how his creative process has been affected by the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. As the conversation started winding down, it seemed likely that Kojima wouldn't have anything to announce at the moment. However, in a twist of fate, the creator blurted out one more thing before the scene cut to the PlayStation Studios logo. What followed was a new trailer for Death Stranding, but it wasn't running on the PS4 or PC, the platforms on which it was previously released. Rather, it was footage captured on PS5. Suffice to say, the newly announced Death Stranding director's cut looks fantastic, and it'll be interesting to see what it adds to the game. However, what stood out the most about the newest Death Stranding trailer wasn't its looks, but rather its overt references to Kojima's critically acclaimed Metal Gear saga. Over the course of the pandemic, many game developers were forced to adapt to different work conditions, adding a layer of mental fortitude that Kojima expresses during the Summer Game Fest as an inspiration to continue work on Death Stranding. While the effects of the pandemic led to trying times for the veteran game developer, the announcement trailer for the PS5's director's cut gave fans a flashback to nostalgic times that were anything but subtle in its references to Metal Gear Solid. The trailer begins with Death Stranding's protagonist, Sam, overlooking an underground bunker-like area with armed guards who appear to be moving in a formation. The layout of the bunker, including the behavioral patterns of the guards, bears immediate resemblance to the first level in Metal Gear Solid where Solid Snake begins his infiltration on Shadow Moses Island. Subtle references aside, Sam quickly devises a plan to sneak past the guards upon inspecting a box of fruit in a curious manner. After emptying the box of fruit, Sam stares at the box, contemplating his next action, before deciding to humorously jump inside of the box in a crouched position. After several seconds, Sam ultimately returns the box in its original position, almost in disbelief that he entertained the idea of walking the path of many a snake before him. The cardboard box has been synonymous with Metal Gear Solid as a series since its introduction in the original as one of the methods to move around in Shadow Moses Island as transport while hiding in a marked box. From Metal Gear Solid 2 onward, it has been a staple in hiding from enemies and sneakily moving about inconspicuously. Cardboard boxes became a part of Snake's charm, as it is referenced in various media including his Super Smash Bros. Reveal. Fans of both Metal Gear and Death Stranding were able to appreciate the tongue-in-cheek reference to the former, considering the tumultuous history with Kojima and Konami. In 2015, the two parted ways after over a 20-year partnership due to creative differences, in which Kojima Productions was created from his independence. While rumors of an Xbox-exclusive title remain in the discussion, Death Stranding director's cut seems to be a PS5 exclusive, with fans expecting more references to Kojima's previous work. Aside from the box, Death Stranding director's cut's trailer showcases some more subtle similarities to Kojima's prior works. For starters, the score simply sounds like it belongs in a Metal Gear game. If thrown into MGS2's plant chapter, or while exploring MGS3's jungle landscape, it would feel right at home. It gives off a tense vibe, and that feeling is accentuated by the tight hallways Sam has to navigate through, a common element of the earlier Metal Gear titles. Finally, the very premise of Sam, who by all accounts seems to be very under-equipped in this trailer, having to sneak by heavily armed guards is also reminiscent of how early Metal Gear games typically forced players to start the game with virtually no equipment and tasked them with procuring all weapons on site. The reveal trailer for Death Stranding director's cut is practically overflowing with Metal Gear influences, but it's not quite clear if this means whatever content this new version introduces will too. However, there is one thing Metal Gear fans can be sure of: it's evident that Kojima hasn't forgotten about his magnum opus series, and if the trailer is any indication, he seems to still harbor a soft spot for Metal Gear. Maybe Kojima Productions got the outsourced Metal Gear Solid and Silent Hill IPs, and it would be great if they'd done the reboot in collaboration with PlayStation, exclusively for PS5. Hideo Kojima also said that we can expect more gameplay in a few weeks. So, he may be hinting at a PlayStation showcase. Only time will tell. At the start of most console generations, game production typically straddles between both types of hardware, targeting the most players as possible, especially those who have yet to upgrade to the higher-end consoles. The same remains true for the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5, and looks to remain that way for a while as hardware shortages are preventing large numbers of players from upgrading. Thankfully, most companies have offered ways to fans to upgrade for free once the new hardware has been obtained, so consumers aren't trapped when buying a game early. There's a bit of a stigma around cross-generation games as many fans tend to be unhappy with decisions to bring what many perceive to be next-gen experiences to older hardware. The defining argument is that developing on older technology holds back advancements for the next-gen version, as the company attempts to make both experiences comparable. These comments constantly surround upcoming PlayStation 5 exclusives like the God of War sequel, Gran Turismo 7 and Horizon Forbidden West, though the developer Guerrilla Games is pushing back on this thought. In a recent interview, Horizon Forbidden West game director Matthews de Jonge was asked about developing the game for both the PS4 and PS5, and whether the simultaneous development cycle was holding the team back at all. His response to the question is that the cross-development wasn't limiting at all. In fact, much of the concepts that were thought up initially were included without considerations of any possible hardware limitations. Ultimately, the guiding goal was creating a unique and awesome adventure for the player to go on. However, de Jonge also confirmed that there are differences between the two products. Besides the obvious features like 3D audio, quick loading and DualSense controller mechanics, the other major component is the graphics. The PlayStation 5 features a cinematic lighting rig that taps into the console's processing power to be used both during gameplay and cinematics, which can't be done on the PS4. Not only that, the PS5 allowed Guerrilla developers to add tons of little details both close-up such as the hairs on Aloy's face as well as at a distance such as moss growing on rocks. Surprisingly, each strand of moss is rendered individually. He said that, open quotes, "I don't think the cross-generation development was limiting in any way. When we started with the concept of this game, we had so many great ideas that ended up being included to the point that we didn't really think about hardware limitations or anything, we just wanted to design a really nice, unique experience for the player. An awesome adventure." End of quotes. Whatever the case may be, players will likely have to get used to the idea of major exclusives on both Xbox and PlayStation hardware being cross-generation for the time being. One of 2021's most anticipated games, Halo Infinite, is also going to be a cross-generation title for both Xbox One and Xbox Series X players. Fans were also a bit upset to learn that the upcoming Battlefield game is also going cross-generation, though EA and DICE have attempted to reassure the community that the game won't be held back by its current-gen version. New video game development studio, Deviation Games, has announced that it is working on a groundbreaking new IP. The studio is also partnering with Sony and PlayStation to add to their roster of award-winning titles. Deviation Games is led by Treyarch and Call of Duty, Black Ops developers, Dave Anthony and Jason Blundell. At their Summer Game Fest presentation, they announced that they had spent the last year building up their team. Deviation Games CEO Dave Anthony and CCO Jason Blundell appeared on stage with Jeff Keighley to announce that the new studio is working on a new video game project at the moment. Anthony said the project has innovation at its very core, with Blundell adding that the game will leave an indelible mark on the industry. Anthony and Blundell had nothing to show at Summer Game Fest 2021, and no information about the game was shared, leaving it up to speculation as to what this PlayStation-partnered IP could be. Speaking about the partnership, Anthony said he was proud to be expanding PlayStation's portfolio of hit after hit, award after award games in a very, very significant way. And also he mentioned that they are honored to partner with PlayStation, who creates quality games consistently, and he also mentioned the free environment and flexibility on the side, which is facts. PlayStation definitely need more quality first-person shooter games, in which they lack in that genre, and also some first-party fighters. I definitely need a PlayStation All-Stars 2, and it should be a success. Speaking of new PlayStation exclusives, Summer Game Fest 2021 sees the reveal of Salt and Sacrifice, a Souls-like game from the critically acclaimed developers of Salt and Sanctuary. Salt and Sacrifice is taking up the mantle as the next Souls-like title. That said, it's taking a different route than most, instead presenting a 2.5D game with Souls-like elements. Players will find many things that they are familiar with as they watch the trailer, but a lot of new and interesting ideas are there as well. It seems like most can't wait to dive into what looks like a dark and compelling narrative. As the trailer shows, the player's character was forced to pay for their sins, but this time they were given a second chance. Players should expect to die quite a bit, but there's always an opportunity to come back and try again. The title of Salt and Sacrifice may sound familiar, as it is from the same developers of Salt and Sanctuary. Players take up the role of mage hunters and track down powerful mages. After defeating each one, players can steal their powers and grow stronger to face the next one. This is reminiscent of hunting down demons in Demon's Souls or Lords of Fire in Dark Souls. The short reveal trailer doesn't show too much of what the game will be like, but players do learn a bit from it. First, the stats seem very similar to those from Dark Souls, with players being able to upgrade their characters however they like. The stats shown in the trailer include strength, dexterity, vitality, will, endurance, arcana, conviction, resolve, and luck. What's more, it also will feature full cooperative gameplay throughout the main story. This is a major draw for a lot of players, as co-op is often a difficult or touchy subject when it comes to Souls-like games. With any luck, more information will be revealed about Salt and Sacrifice soon, but players will just have to wait and see. The reveal trailer for the game is linked above, so that players can see what it's all about for themselves. It seems like it will be just as deadly as its inspiration, with challenging monsters, massive boss fights, and deadly traps at every turn. In order to deal with these threats, players will make use of swords, bows, magic, and more. The boss fights in particular look very interesting, with each having unique abilities and mechanics that the player will need to find a way to overcome, as Salt and Sacrifice is in development for PS4 and PS5, and is set to release in 2022. And that's all for the video, guys. Like and share the video for a greater audience. Comment your thoughts on the topics, and if you want to contribute for the growth of the channel, the link to my PayPal in the video's description and in the channel banner. Donations are always appreciated, and it can help me to create more contents and share news consistently, and could open doors for live streams, game playthroughs, podcasts, merch, etc. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon, and until then, from SMPV, it's goodbye.